Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out to the share. We're very glad to hear from Rabbi Shmuel Reichman on this new amazing sefer, sharing Shmuel himself. We were able to purchase right after the share. We're gladly sign it and give you a message. We're presented by Chazak. I want to thank Young Israel Hemstead for hosting it at the gala. We appreciate all the effort for this share. A little background about Rabbi Reichman is he has a singing from Reitz. He grew up in the Five Towns, and he currently lives in Chicago. And it's our good honor to go upon him.
Thank you, Rabbi. So this is all mine. Just to give you a little bit of an insight as to how this started, I was a chus of giving shirim to Chazak, for Chazak. And about a year ago, Rabbi said, would you like to do a book tour? I told him I'm publishing a sefer. And I smiled and I said, yeah, sure, we'll do a book tour, it'll be great. I didn't think it would actually happen, but there's a beautiful saying we say every single Friday night, Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat chila. That if you want to create anything in reality, it has to originate within a thought. You have to have vision. And we're here a year later, and Baruch Hashem, we're going to share some incredibly deep ideas of Torah. And I want to start off tonight's shir by sharing a story. Stories of a carpenter. And this carpenter was the best carpenter. He loved to build, and he built houses. That was his passion, that was his life. And he spent his entire life, 30 years, building houses. And he was ready to call it quits, to retire. He was ready to move on to the next stage of his life. So he went over to his boss, and he said, I loved working for you. I've built hundreds of homes, and it's been great. I'm ready to retire. And the boss obviously wasn't too happy, but he said, okay, you are our best worker, our favorite worker. We loved having you. Can you just do one more job for us? One more house. So he says, I really don't have it. I don't have it in me. I just don't want to do it anymore. I'm done. I've saved up enough. I have enough for retirement. I'm ready to move on to the next stage of my life. And the boss insists, and he says, can you just do one more? So he says, okay, I'll do one more. Fine. But he's not into it. He's not passionate about it. He doesn't really focus, and he's shoddy craftsmanship, and he doesn't build a great house. He builds a pretty, piece of garbage. And a couple months go by, and it's still a house, still built the house. And he's done. He goes over to his boss, and something really strange is happening, because he went over to tell his boss he's done, but everyone who he's ever worked with is there in the room. And they're all smiling, they're all happy, and he doesn't understand what's happening. So he goes over to his boss and he says, I finished the home, I'm ready to move on, what's going on? And the boss smiles, goes into his pocket, takes out the keys, and gives it to him. And says, here are the keys to the house. It's our going away present. You just built your own home. And he's crushed. He thinks to himself, if I only would have known that I was building my house, I would have built the best house I've ever built. I would have been passionate and driven and focused. I would have created something extraordinary. I would have built the best house imaginable. But I built the worst house because I knew I was building my house. And the Ramchal, the Maharal, the Ramban, they open up a fascinating topic in life. Many people think that Olam Haba, the world to come, is for your soul, for your neshama, your spiritual self, whatever that means. And you do mitzvahs, you serve Hashem, you live a good life, and your spiritual whatever will experience Olam Haba. But they say the most profound principle you can ever learn, which is that Olam Haba, the world to come, is nothing other than experiencing you. Experiencing the person you became. The consciousness, the values, the thoughts, the philosophy, the ideals, the inner world that you crafted and built, you will experience that eternally. That's why Shabbos, the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Nun Zayin says, Shabbos is Me'ein Olam Haba. It's a taste of the world to come. Why? Because Shabbos, we stop melacha. Now, melacha, we think is physical activity, but melacha also comes from the root of malach, which is a creative emanation. An angel is a creative emanation from Hashem. Melacha is creative activity. On Shabbos, we stop creating and we have a taste of experiencing who we've become. And for a lot of people, it can be very scary and a little bit daunting and perhaps a little sad when we're by ourselves, because if we don't have external stimulus, we have to come face to face with who we actually are. And if you're not feeding your mind, if you're not feeding yourself, if you're not growing and thriving and striving and pushing yourself When you're by yourself, you feel empty. And that's you. But when you are pushing, when you are striving, when you're learning and growing and struggling and pushing yourself to the max, you're living at a different frequency, at a different level, and something changes. And that's why I wrote the Sefer. The purpose of the Sefer is to give you the deepest ideas in life. We'll talk about why I wrote it, but the what, in terms of what the Sefer is, it's an inspiring gateway into the deepest concepts, the deepest principles, thoughts, ideas. It's not designed to help you be Mekayim your mitzvah of Talmud Torah, so you read another Dvar Torah. It's meant to open you up, to help you strive for true greatness. And it's broken up according to the Parsha, even though it's not really a Parsha book. Everything's connected to the Parsha, so that you have a weekly set limud, as opposed to most philosophy books, which you open up and you close quite quickly, because it's hard to orient yourself in how am I going to actually learn this. It's fundamentally written according to the yearly cycle. And most abstract philosophy books, you read them and you say, what did I actually learn? So every chapter ends off with summaries of the actual principles, ideas contained within each chapter, and there's discussion questions at the end of each chapter so that you can bring it into a social environment, bring it to the Shabbos table with the chavrusa, with your spouse, with your friend, and then there are action points, because as we all know, the greatest distance in life is between the head and the heart, because we can learn the most profound principles in life and then say, what does that mean? How do I live that idea? How do I bring it into my life? So every single chapter has practical tools for living the ideas. But I want to delve into some of the most fundamental concepts. And let's start with this. What is greatness? What is greatness? It's probably the most misunderstood concept in the world, because in secular culture, in the Western world, in the capitalistic system, greatness is objective. The very best who gets the best results is considered great. You want to be the best basketball player, you gotta be the best basketball player. You want to be the best accountant, the best lawyer, the best architect, the best doctor, the best rabbi, the best speaker, the best educator. You have to be the best. You want to get paid the most. You want to actually become noted and known for becoming great. You have to become better than everyone else. But that's not greatness. And the starting point of learning is recognizing that the most fundamental component of the human experience is miscommunication. Words are just words, but we often misunderstand words. For example, you can say, I love you to your wife or to your husband. You can say, I love pizza. That's the same word, and hopefully it means very different things. But we all miscommunicate because we all have our own understanding of words, of ideas, and of concepts. And when you understand that you don't yet fully understand, and when you understand that not everyone has the same perspective as you, you start to say, what do some ideas actually mean? I'll give you a great example. A couple weeks ago, I was trying to get whole wheat challahs for Shabbos. And the reason why is because I looked at the freezer on Friday afternoon and we had no whole wheat challahs. So I ran to the grocery store, supermarket, and I looked for whole wheat challahs, and I couldn't find any. So I went over to one of the workers and I said, excuse me, do you have any whole wheat challahs? And he looked at me and he said, whole wheat, of course, of course. I said, but there's none left on the shelves. Do you have any in the back storage? And he said, whole wheat, of course, come with me. I was thinking, like, come with you? Like, okay, like I'll come with you, sure. So I'm thinking, like, I'll get some VIP service, go to the back of the store, see what they have back there, it'll be cool. So I go with him to the back of the store, and we go right past the kitchen. We go right past the pantry. We go right past the storage area, and he starts taking me to the very back of the warehouse. I'm thinking these are some very well-hidden challahs. And he takes me to the offices in the back of the warehouse, and he takes me past all the offices up the stairs. And he literally takes me to the top floor, to the manager's office. I'm thinking these are some very well-hidden challahs. He knocks on the door, and right as the door is opening, I see the name of the manager. And his name is Howie. And opens the door, and the worker looks at me and smiles and says, Howie! And I had to explain to the manager of the store that I was not looking for Howie, but whole wheat challahs. And this is just a miscommunication, and I apologize. It was the funniest thing. The worker happened to actually leave right as he introduced us. So I was literally there just like frozen in my, frozen in place. It was a great example, and I obviously didn't find it so funny at the time. It was a little awkward. But the point is like this. The point is that miscommunication is a fundamental component of life, but it's also the most fundamental component of learning. Because what is greatness? The Gemara in Nida Daf Lamed Amud Beis fundamentally opens up the topic of greatness. And it says, and this will change your life, it is the most incredible Gemara. It says that when we were all in the womb, when we were a fetus in the womb, we learned Kol Torah Kula. We learned all of Torah. The Malach taught each of us Kol Torah Kula. And right before we were born, the Malach hits us on the mouth and we forget everything. So everyone asks the same question, the Vilna Gaon, the Maharal. Everyone asks, why teach it to us in the first place? If you're going to make us forget it, why teach it in the first place? And why make us forget it? So the Vilna Gaon says something incredible. He says the reason why is because you didn't forget it, you didn't lose it, you lost access to it. What you were given in the womb was something profound. You weren't just learning Torah. You weren't opening a Chumash. You weren't learning a Gemara. You were being shown the cosmic nature of reality, the meta purpose of everything. You were being shown the purpose of all of creation, but you're also being shown your unique purpose. Who you are supposed to be, literally what you're designed to become, your underlying purpose. Who you are, what you're supposed to come into this world to become. But you lose that because your job is not to get that as a gift, but to come into this world and create it, to earn it, to build it. And that's why when you hear deep ideas, sometimes you have this feeling of recognition. Not learning, but recognition. It's almost like it clicks. Why? John Locke was famous for saying that we're all blank slates. There's no such thing as true ideas. You just are basically molding your minds. But this is fundamentally saying that you are already perfect at root, and you're just not yet in touch with it. And when you learn, you're becoming more and more in touch with yourself. So what is true greatness? True greatness is not becoming great, it's becoming you. And no two people are the same, which means that true greatness is self-awareness. It's understanding who you are. It's going on this incredible journey of self-exploration, of striving to become you. And if you want to get the chills, I'll tell you this. This Gemara is the central underlying theme of the Sefer. As in, the entire Sefer is designed to help you become the ultimate version of yourself. It's not a self-help book. It's not a self-development book. It's a synthesis, a harmony, a synergizing of the deepest elements of machshava and depth and philosophy with inspiration, with Gemara, with halacha, it is the ultimate harmony. But the underlying principle of this book is that it is designed to help you take that journey to become your ultimate self. And my father, who himself is incredible, he told me just a couple months ago, as I was obviously, I've been giving shiurim on this for a long time, as he saw the Sefer, and he said, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but you're not going to believe me. I said over that Gemara at your bris. Now that blew my mind. That blew my mind, because I've been sharing that Gemara for years at that point, and he just never thought to tell me that, as in, it just clicked that, oh my gosh, I literally told that Gemara over at your bris. And my father's expertise is not machshava, as in it's not something he often says, so that wasn't something which I just said, oh, of course you did, like that was something you would do. That's not something which I thought made any sense. I thought that was the most incredible thing ever. And the story doesn't end there, because about 3 months ago, I was zocheh to have the bris of my bechor, of my firstborn son. And as you can tell where the story is going, I obviously shared the same Gemara at his bris as well. So this simple idea that you're in this world to become great, but greatness is subjective, which means that you never compare yourself to anyone else. It's like, we're in a base medrash. I'll share one divrei chol, one ma'aseh shahaya that is not fundamentally Torah. Michael Jordan was asked how he became Michael Jordan. How did you become the greatest of all time? And he said, everyone else wanted to be like me. Everyone else compared themselves to me, and I compared myself to no one. All I wanted to do was to be better than I was the day before. And if you live like that, you start getting outside of the realm of jealousy and comparison and trying to say, I want that person's relationship, that person's health, that person's finances, that person's wisdom, and you start saying, how can I become the greatest version of myself? And I want to just take a step back because I want to share some of the most essential principles within the Sefer, within this book. But I want to just take a step back and share a little bit of my life story because I grew up very normal. I grew up very normal, not striving for anything, not trying to change the world. And at a certain point, my life fell apart. I was facing death on a daily basis. I was having medical difficulties. My life fell apart in many different ways. And Baruch Hashem, that was the greatest gift because I got to put myself together from scratch. And it's one of those things where I got to ask myself at a very young age, at about 20, the questions you only really ask much later in life. Meaning if I'm facing death on a daily basis, I start asking myself, why am I in this world? What am I living for? If I'm only living for a couple more days, what am I doing with the time I have left? How can I make the most of my skill sets? How can I start thriving and trying to contribute something to the world? And my passion in life became striving for greatness and helping others do the same. But when I was younger, what I thought the world needed, what I thought Klal Yisrael needed, was inspiration. Right? Everyone wants inspiration. Everyone wants to feel inspired, to feel just on fire. But I realized that we don't need inspiration. Inspiration is important. But everyone thinks they need inspiration. Inspiration is a quick fix. What we actually need is depth. We need wisdom. We need true underlying fundamental principles, ideas. How often do we listen to Divrei Torah, listen to a shir, and we're not changing the way we see the world? Now, I want to share a simple idea with you. A lot of people spend their entire lives being mekayim the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Which means what? That you want to feel like a good Eved Hashem. You want to feel like you are being mekayim a mitzvah. So you listen to a shir while you're driving, you listen to a shir while you're cooking, you go to morning seder, you go to night seder, you have a chavrusa, whatever it is. And that's a distinct, isolated part of your day. That's not Talmud Torah. That's academic Torah. Now, I have studied at great academic institutions in life. I've studied at Harvard, I've studied at University of Chicago, I've studied at YU. I have, Baruch Hashem, lots of academic experience. The problem with academia is that it's fundamentally analytical. As in, the purpose is not to live the ideas. It's not for it to permeate you and transform the way you experience life. You analyze. It's a purely intellectual endeavor. And Talmud Torah is not an academic endeavor. Talmud Torah is transformative. You should never leave an experience of learning Torah the same way you came in. You fundamentally shift your paradigms, perspectives, your philosophy, your views, your ideology, your inner world there should be a chemical explosion. And yet that's not the way most people view Torah. Most people view Torah as a limud, as a seder, as a shir. And they're mekayim the mitzvah so that they feel that they were, so to speak, did a mitzvah. And that's what Hashem wants. But if you want to understand what Talmud Torah is transformative. It means that you start realizing that true Torah learning is going on an endless journey of discovery. It's an endless journey of deeper and deeper wisdom. And the reason, it's one of these things where I love Bali Teshuvah. I love Bali Teshuvah, people who are becoming from. Now, I'm not a Baal Tshuva. I was born from birth. But why do I love Baal Tshuva? They are always deepening, always expanding, always exploring, always questioning because they know that they don't know. And when you're born from birth and you're taught certain things again and again and again, you come under the illusion that you already know. And you want to know what true learning is? It's recognizing that you never know. There's an endless spectrum of knowledge, and you are never at the end. which means you can always deepen. And true learning is engaging in opening up every halacha, every sugya, every concept, every question, everything you think you know. You realize that you have only you've only scraped the surface. And there is an endless amount left. And it's one of these things where the greatness of Torah is that it's the greatest wisdom. But when you think of Torah as something which is literally just like a surface level kiyum, fulfilling of a mitzvah, and that you don't explore and search for the deepest aspects of life in Torah because you don't think it's there, it's the ultimate corruption of what Torah is. And part of it is just switching that simple paradigm of understanding how to learn. Because it's one of these things where part of the reason I wrote the Sefer, one of the underlying concepts of the Sefer, is the concept of oneness. The concept of interconnectivity, synergy, synthesis. Because a lot of people, they think of Torah as a bunch of disconnected parts. You have Tanakh, right? Torah and Vim Ksuvim. You have Chazal, you have Mishnah, Gemara, Midrashim. You have Rishonim, you have Achronim. You have Peskei Halacha. Then you have Musar, self-development. You have Machshava, philosophy. You have Hashkafa. And they're just a bunch of different pieces and parts. But when you start to realize the interconnectivity of all aspects of Torah, and you start to realize that in order to really understand anything, you need to interconnect it with everything. Meaning that, how does anything work? You open up a halachic sugya, right? It's all rooted in Torah Sheb'Ksav. You always look for a makor, a source in the Torah. And it's expressed in the Mishnah in a very potent way. It's further developed in the Gemara. And the Rishonim open up the Gemara into a sugya. And then Musar is, so to speak, the self-development aspect of Torah. Halacha is living Torah. Machshava is the why of Torah, as in the underlying fundamental philosophical components, concepts, ideas of Torah. And they're all interconnected. And then you start to realize that in order to understand any aspect of Torah, you have to understand the interconnectivity of all of Torah. For example, if anyone has ever learned a sugya in Shas, a sugya in Gemara, in Talmud, you open up a sugya, in order to understand a sugya, you start to realize that this sugya is related to a different topic. In order to understand that topic, you have to understand that three other topics are mentioned in this topic. And if you open up a Rambam, you have to understand this Rambam. And you open up, something here, you have to understand this over there. You start to realize that to truly understand Torah means to engage in an organic entity of interconnected oneness. And it's kind of like a neural system where, like, your brain, everything's connected. Everything, the way you think, is through connections, neural connections. Torah is the greatest wisdom. And it's one of those things where Torah is a science that's beyond science. The reason why you admire the philosophical components of scientific wisdom is because everything is interconnected. You plug in anything into the system, and it has to fit in with everything else. That's the underlying component of a science, is that if there's contradictions, if it's just a bunch of facts, if nothing is actually meaningful and interconnected and part of a grander philosophical conceptual system, it's not a science. It's just Narishkeit. It's just a bunch of things. And I shouldn't say no one. I would say that the greatest challenge is getting access to the point where you experience and respect and admire that Torah is not only the greatest science, but it's a science beyond science. And that you can use your rational faculties in the greatest way and yet move beyond it. And that's why, we'll get to in a couple of minutes, that the greatest principle of Torah is the interconnectivity, brilliance, and oneness of Torah. And that when you're not experiencing that, when you're not in love with Torah's chayim, but when you're learning Torah and it's not bringing you alive, and I'm not just talking about, learning fluffy, inspirational ideas. I'm talking about, learning hardcore Gemara Be'in, and Lamdas, and Halacha, and Musar, and Ashkafa, and Machshava, and no matter what you're engaged in, it's one of those things where when you learn, you want to bring everything you are to what you're learning there. Meaning everything that you've learned until now should come expressed into what you're learning now, and everything you're learning now should transform everything you know until now. There should be this explosion of true experiential learning, and why don't we do that? You know why? It is very scary. It is very scary to be vulnerable enough to truly learn, because in order to truly learn, you have to give up the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, the way you see Hashem, the way you see people, the way you see an idea. You have to give that up for something new. And that's not comfortable. That's scary. And to truly, truly learn, you have to go into the unknown. You have to journey towards the truth. You have to take that vulnerable leap into the committed journey to truth. And that's the name of the Sefer, the journey to your ultimate self. Why? It's the journey to your ultimate self, Lech Lecha. Why Lech Lecha? Because Avraham was told Lech Lecha. Why? Why wasn't he told where to go? What's Lech Lecha mean? Lech Lecha means go, right? It also means go to yourself. Avraham was told to embark on a journey to himself, but he wasn't told where to go. So everyone asks, why wasn't Avraham told his destination? Lech Lecha mi'artzecha, just go. Hashem didn't want to tell him where he was going. But when you're journeying to your true self, when you're journeying to truth, to Hashem, you have no idea where the destination is going to lead you, but you commit to the journey because it's the truth. And when life doesn't become paying the bills and just enjoying life and just being Mekayim Mitzvot Talmud Torah, but it becomes this extraordinary adventure and quest of true learning, true becoming your true self. Life takes on a whole. You can't go back. It's like, and it's one of the things where we think it's not for us, right? It's designed. This is for like the great among us. This is not for me. Like everyone who hears this is like, I'm just a normal person. This sounds great for like great people, not for me. No, you also learned Kol Torah Kul in the womb, but your Torah, your purpose. And it's not about becoming objectively great, it's about becoming the greatest version of yourself. And if I were to share with you one more fundamental principle from the Sefer, it's the answer to the following question. In almost every lecture you've ever heard, I'm sure the Rav, the teacher, the Moreh will end off by saying, and we should all be zoch, we should all merit to connect to the spiritual, and connect to Hashem. And it sounds really wonderful. What does that mean, to connect to the spiritual? To connect to the infinite, to connect to the transcendent, the ethereal. What does that even mean? And if you ask a lot of teachers, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say that? They'll probably shrug it off and say, you know what I mean, and they might shrug their shoulders. They might not be able to, some might be able to explain to you what they mean, but many won't. So what do we mean by that? So one option is that it's literally that, just a fluffy idea, it doesn't mean anything. There's no way to explain it. Another option is that it's only for the elite, it's only for the philosophers, the intellectuals, the great among us, but not for us. We can't access that concept. But the last option, and this is perhaps the most fundamental principle in the Sefer, it's based on the Maharal, the Ramchal, Nefesh HaChaim, the Ramban, is that the transcendent, the ethereal, the infinite, the spiritual, it fundamentally permeates every aspect of reality, because the physical world is an expression of the infinite. Now, what does that mean? So philosophers will say that the physical world is a place. And in order to connect to the transcendent, to the infinite, to the divine, you have to transcend the physical world, which means what? Buddhists will meditate and just escape. Christians will be celibate, not engage in the physical. Muslims don't drink wine. It's one of these things where, in order to be spiritual, you remove yourself from the physical. But as the Ramchal, the Maharal, and everyone who I just mentioned, we don't have to go through the whole list every single time, they open up with the most beautiful way, but it's based on a Maimer Chazal, Medrash Rabbah, which says, Estakel b'raiso bar alma. That Hashem looked into the Torah, used the Torah to create the world, which means what? The physical world is an expression, an emanation, a projection of the infinite, of the spiritual. Now, what does that mean? Well, think of a seed. A seed expresses itself into a tree. Think of a human being. A zygote expresses itself into a fully grown human being. Right? You look at a screen coming from a projector, what you see on the screen came from the projector. Which means that when the physical world stems from the spiritual, the way to access the infinite, the transcendent, the ethereal, the spiritual, whichever word we're going to use, because it's a whole topic, every single chapter is fundamentally connected to this concept. The way you connect to the spiritual is through the physical, which means that every component of the physical universe is fundamentally permeated with spiritual significance. That's why Ba'alei Machshava open up every aspect of human experience, human emotions, psychology, philosophy, mathematics. The Maharal of mathematics is brilliant. It's one of these things where you start to realize everything has spiritual significance. And you start to realize that you can literally start experiencing every aspect of your physical experience with transcendent lens. You start seeing past the surface. And it's one of these things where you say, that sounds really difficult. How do I access the spiritual through the physical? That means I have to be a philosopher every single second of my life? I have to always translate past the surface? I can't do that. You do it all the time without even realizing it. Because think about what you're doing right now. Right now, you can't see my thoughts. You can't see my emotions. You can't see what's going on inside of me. But I'm taking a deep breath, neshima. I'm blowing out some vibrations into the world. My neshama is now being expressed into the world. The vibrations are hitting your eardrums. Those vibrations are turning into sounds. Those sounds are turning into words. Those words into sentences. And you are reconstructing what was inside of my head. And all of a sudden, what was inside of me, infinite, abstract, the thoughts that you have no access to, are now inside of you. And you're experiencing me. Now, you're not experiencing me myself, because the words are never the thing itself. It's always a limited expression. But you are gaining access to what you had no access to. And that's what the physical world is. It's a limited surface where if you learn how to peer past the surface and gain access to that which is, so to speak, the source of it, you start viewing the world in a different way. That's what Purim is. We just passed Purim Katan. Purim and Hanukkah was a transition, the world transition. Why? Because at the beginning of world history, there were miracles. Prophecy. HaKadosh Baruch Hashem openly revealed himself to the world. It was a different type of reality. The physical, the world was clearly reflecting a higher source. And now we transition to a point where it doesn't. You used to go to a Navi and say, what's my tafkid, what's my purpose? And the prophet would tell you. Now you have to figure it out yourself. And it's one of those things where you start to realize that all of life is about learning how to peer past the surface and see things in a deeper way. And once you start to realize that, you start to go on that journey. And it's an incredible journey. And it's one of those things where you ask yourself, if we're spiritual people, if Klal Yisrael, Jewish people, are spiritual people, why are all of our mitzvahs physical? You ever think about that? How many spiritual mitzvahs do we have? How many philosophical mitzvahs do we have? Believe in Hashem, don't serve idolatry, don't be jealous. You can literally count on one hand how many intellectual, philosophical mitzvahs we have. Right? What happened to our spirituality? All of our mitzvahs are physical. Eat matzah, right? Shake lulav, wear tefillin. Well, what in the world is going on? Why are we a physical people? But the concept of mitzvahs, which the Maharal says comes from the root of tzavta, to connect. It's all about connecting the physical to the spiritual. It's about creating the underlying concept I mentioned before of oneness. That you don't disconnect and disengage from the physical and become a philosopher who has nothing to do with the world, but you engage in every aspect of physicality in the most brilliant, deep, emotionally intelligent, and conscious, meaningful way. And you start living a higher life in this world as opposed to transcending the world. And when you understand it, it changes everything. It changes how you view the world, because as Einstein said, you can view the world as if nothing's a miracle, or you can view the world as if everything's a miracle. And the choice is up to you. In a similar way, you can view the world as if everything is meaningful, or you can view the world as if nothing is meaningful. And if you view the world as everything is meaningful, that can be scary. Why? Because that means everything you do, everything you think about, everything you say, everything you eat, everything is meaningful. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of responsibility, but your life will never be the same. And if nothing is meaningful, which is pretty much the notion of a lot of atheists nowadays, it's great because there's no responsibility. But your life is meaningless. And the choice is up to you. You get to choose how you see the world. When you start to realize that learning is expansion, it's changing the way you see things, it's questioning every mitzvah, every concept, every halacha, everything you think you know, you can deepen, you can explore, you can expand, you can start living a higher version of yourself when you start viewing yourself as capable, deserving, and destined to achieve all of the things you've always dreamed of achieving. It's about engaging in a continuous process, building momentum, creating an environment, getting around like-minded people. It's making the choices that actually help you and are worthwhile long term. And the fundamental, it's one of those things where the way I wrote this Sefer is I started to realize that I had a lot of things in my head, and there were a lot of contradictions. A lot of contradictions in terms of sugyas I was learning, questions I had, sources I had. So I started writing everything down. Everything. Every question, every source, every Gemara, every sugya, every shir I heard, every book I read, every sefer I learned, every idea I had, whether it was in the shower, when I was lying down in bed, walking, exercising, I was always writing things down, and then I started writing down in files. I used OneNote. I started having files for every mitzvah, every halacha, every question, every concept, every sugya, every source, every single aspect in Musar and Ashkafa, and philosophy and psychology and mathematics, and Machshava and Musar and Gemara, Be'in and medical ethics and psychology, everything. And interconnecting everything to everything, meaning everything was connected to everything. And you start to realize the contradictions and you fix the contradictions, because once it's outside of yourself, you get to see what you actually think, and you can say, let's fix this. This doesn't make any sense. Oh wait, this is connected to this. And you start to realize the brilliance of interconnectivity and how true harmony and oneness of ideas is the brilliance of Torah. And as opposed to having a cute vartlach on the parsha or a great Devar Torah that doesn't say much, you start to realize the depth and wisdom of Torah once you go deeper and deeper. And by the way, a shir that is open to that is brilliant, because some shirim, if you break them down and spend 10 hours on one shir, really breaking down what was said, there are 25 contradictions, nothing makes sense. But a great shir is when you break it down, go deeper and deeper, deeper, and the deeper you go, the deeper it gets. And the deeper you go, the more it comes together. And the deeper you go, the more the underlying oneness of everything that's being said. And not everything is susceptible to that type of analysis. That's true brilliance. And the purpose of the Sefer was basically a reflection of the oneness of Torah, which is basically the concept of the more and more you learn, the more and more you start to realize that not only is everything interconnected, but there's a hierarchy of ideas, meaning some ideas come up more than often. Some ideas are more fundamental. Some ideas are more potent, more deep. And it's almost like you have this tree of wisdom where there are fundamental underlying principles, which you can call the trunk, and then there are expressions of those principles, right? Those are the branches, and then expressions of those principles, branches, and smaller branches, and then leaves are like you can call them mitzvos, which are basically like the outer expressions, and obviously they're all connected. But true wisdom is understanding the hierarchy of concepts, sourcing things back, understanding how ideas work. And it's not just being Mekayim a mitzvah Talmud Torah, but it's becoming truly someone in love with wisdom, in love with learning, in love with actually becoming Torah, not just learning Torah, becoming wisdom, not just learning wisdom. And it's supposed to transform you. And once that happens, you just never go back. And it's about realizing that all of life is about connection. We want to connect to our best selves. We want to connect to other people in marriage, in our family, in our communities, in Klal Yisrael, in the world. We want to connect to ideas. We want to connect to Hashem. We want to connect in the best of ways. And by the way, that is the underlying concept of the journey to your ultimate self, which I haven't yet shared in none of the other shirim we've given. But the journey to your ultimate self is a journey to your ultimate self, that's a capital S, because then you go to your expanded self, which is in marriage. Then your expanded self, your family. Then your expanded self, your community. Your expanded self, Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. Your expanded self, Adam HaRishon's Neshama. Every human being comes from Adam HaRishon's Neshama. Then the ultimate Neshama Shel Neshamos, the ultimate self of the universe, the source of all self, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that's the journey that you take. It's a journey towards the extraordinary, and it's a journey into the unknown. And that's the fundamental reason why I wrote this. I'll end up with a story. It's a story of couple months back, I was speaking at a conference. And the way these conferences usually work is that there are two microphones, and the person who introduces has one microphone, he introduces, and then he takes the microphone, there's one microphone up on the podium, and the speaker comes up and he uses that microphone. And I'll never forget this. This time it was the strangest thing. There's only one microphone on the podium. And the guy introduces the CEO of the company, and he finishes introducing, and I come up, and instead of giving me the microphone, he keeps the microphone, and I'm thinking, like, what in the world is going on? Like, I've never seen this happen before. And he walks to the front of the podium, and he turns to the audience, and he says something I'll never forget. But before we get to that, the purpose of the Sefer is to give you access to the deepest ideas in life, to not tell you things you already know, to not help you be Mekayim the mitzvah Talmud Torah, to not have a good read or a good inspiring experience. It's supposed to be all that too. Every single chapter starts off with inspiring stories. There are summaries at the end of every chapter so you really get a sense of what you're learning. There are discussion questions so it becomes much more than just an intellectual endeavor. It becomes something you bring into your life with your friends, with your relationships, with the Shabbos table. And there are action points so you can start acting on it. It's so difficult to say, what does this mean to me? How do I live these ideas? How does this Torah become part of my life? And there are footnotes in every single chapter connecting everything in that chapter to everything else in the book. So you start to realize how what you're learning now affects all the other things you're learning. You start to see the interconnectivity. You want to delve deeper into something you're learning, a certain idea. There are footnotes throughout the book connecting to all other parts of the book. Because these aren't just separate ideas, these aren't just beautiful divrei Torah, these aren't nice concepts. It's designed to be a reflection of the harmony and oneness of Torah wisdom. And the scariest thing in life is journeying to your ultimate self. Because it means that you have to go on a journey. And it means that you have to grow. And it means that you have to engage in change. And when those things are scary, we don't do it. But when you start to realize that that is life, that is life itself. That if you are not in pain, because how do you build muscle? You rip your muscles apart. You look at someone in the gym, and if you're an alien looking through the window, you think someone's pointing a gun at him, making him do that. He's paying to do that. Why? Because he knows that the way you grow is you rip your muscles apart. You want to get in good shape, you push yourself to the max. How are you doing in your emotional shape, your spiritual shape, your intellectual shape? You got to be pushing. But when you're pushing, oh my gosh, do you enjoy it? Those endorphins. Well, spiritual endorphins come, what is happiness? Happiness is when you are striving and becoming your best self. You don't have to have a smile on your face. It doesn't have to be enjoyable. It's enjoyable in the sense that you are living with meaning and purpose and passion. And that is life. And if you're not, it's time to start. And if no one in the history of mankind has ever been perfect or become perfect. We always can take our life to the next level. And if it's not one aspect of your life, it's another aspect of your life. It's so easy. It's one of these things where, and we'll come to a close with this, but it's one of those things where if you're 10 years old and you're a kid, it's okay to ask every question and start learning because it's okay to be a child. But when you're an adult, it's so embarrassing to start engaging in something you're not good at because you're already good at other things. And if you're good at things, why would you want to look like a fool? It's the Jungian concept of the fool, where you don't want to start and become a beginner once you're already good at certain things because you can just rest on your laurels and rest on the fact that certain things are already easy. But once you realize that life itself is struggle and growth, it's just expansion, it's this just engaging in learning how to enjoy the struggle, enjoy the process, enjoy every aspect of your life, you start to just look for things in your life that aren't yet the way you want them to be. You start to look for openings and gaps. You fall in love with questions. As opposed to the embarrassment that I don't know the answer to this, you start to say, oh my gosh, there's ideas out there I can connect to. There are concepts I can learn. I can give up the way I see the world for the way I know I could see the world. And in order to grow, you have to give up who you are for who you could become. And that's the greatest thing you can ever accomplish. Now, you all notice that there's a problem here, right? What's the problem? Why can't I end this year yet? The microphone. Microphone. What was the problem with the microphone story? there was no ending to it, right? Now, no one starts a story without ending it. It's just not acceptable. You get fired that way, you don't get hired again to speak. You're definitely not going to get hired to speak again. But isn't that our life? Right? We all have a starting point to our story. A joke has to have an ending, it has to have a punchline. A story has to have a conclusion, it has to go somewhere, otherwise it's not a story. You have a setup for the single purpose of having something that concludes, that it goes somewhere. That's our lives. We all have a setup. We're all, so to speak, right now at our current point in our journey. But what kind of conclusion are we going to write? And the first principle is to realize that you are writing the story. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave you Bechira Chavshus. You are writing your story. And once you realize that, why not make it the greatest story imaginable? No. It's not for the great. It's not for those people who you see are famous. You're not just a nobody who's going to live your life doing nothing. No, it's going to be you too. You also learn Kol HaTorah Kula in the womb. You're also going to take your journey to yourself. It doesn't have to be objectively great. You don't have to change the world and be famous. You can live the most extraordinary life, becoming the greatest version of you on your terms, by becoming self-aware and writing your ultimate story. Don't let fear get in the way. Don't let those voices inside of you that says, oh, it's not for me. Don't let that get in the way. It is for you. Because we are each building our home. Back to the introductory story. We're building our home. And what kind of home do you want to build? I mean, it's one of those things where you experience that home, not just in Olam Haba, every day. Right? Who do you spend 24/7 with? You. Why not fall in love with yourself the right way by becoming the greatest version of yourself? So my bracha to you is that we truly engage in this journey. We all strive to become our ultimate selves. And I'm going to invite everyone, at the back table, I'm now going to, you can all purchase a copy of the Sefer. I ask you, I invite you, I implore you to all get a copy of the Sefer. Be happy to write a personal inscription for you. And I hope we can all continue taking the ultimate journey to our ultimate selves.
Thank you, Reichman. I think you deserve a round of applause for this. Everyone again is welcome to purchase Sefer in the back. Rabbi will gladly sign.